Sorry, go ahead, Sophie.
All right, yes. So I just want to thank you all for hanging tough during COVID and continuing to be engaged. It's wonderful to learn more about the history of this park. I actually, had heard many times, oh, the community was really involved. Oh, it wouldn't have happened without them. But I did not know the full extent of the community initiative, the partnership with the city, the very interesting connection with Sylvia McLaughlin. And it really is a little park that works hard. It is not a big park, but it is in a location where it just gets a lot of traffic and a lot of use. And as a result, it's become a little bit worn out. But that's a good thing, right? It's become worn out from use and sort of being overloved. We fast forward, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Scott Ferris, our Director of Parks. He is one of the most tireless, dedicated, and hardworking department heads we have in Berkeley. And that's saying a lot because we have exceptional department heads across the board. But this man is so dedicated to the community. He delivers so many projects. I can catch him in the hall or in a conversation and just say, what's up with a little element of some project in John Hinkle Park or something. And immediately he knows every detail, the schedule, where the money's come from, which contractor is there that day. It's phenomenal. And he has been delivering the upgrades to our parks that you're seeing, the Live Oak Park Community Center, the Tot Lot at King. Yes, get your Measure T1 update booklet. But I cannot say enough, and I know I'm surprising him here with this, but I just want you to know what an incredible can-do parks director we have here. And here he is tonight. He has a meeting every night for the marina, for a little park like this. He shows up for everything. So just want to thank Scott. You all know Brennan as your co-board member, very active in TONA, but he also is the Parks Commissioner for District 5, so he's giving his time. I hope I'm not upstaging here. He's a Parks Commissioner, very highly valued. He missed a meeting by no fault of his own. It's because we didn't get some paperwork in on time. And they didn't hold the meeting. And the secretary of the commission emailed me and said, I really hope you are reappointing Mr. Brennan, Mr. Cox, because he just makes such important contributions. We really hope he's coming back. So I just can't say enough about the contributions he's making as well. I know he's a great partner for Scott. And he is an incredible designer. And he is very generous, as we all know. Oh my God, this is not pre-planned. We hadn't talked to each other before this. But he is also an incredible landscape architect, and he is donating his firm's time and expertise to put together a quick plan for some light touch improvements for this park that I think are actually going to make a huge difference. Meanwhile, Scott already had a little bit of money programmed for the park, primarily for some play equipment and to change out the sand for something that's more compliant with the kind of materials they use in these play areas. And he came to me and said, we're going to be doing this work. And I said, well, if I get you a little more money, can we do a little more? And he said, sure, get me some money. I'd be happy to do more. So I went and got the money and then knocked on Brennan's door, and he was willing to help Scott out by doing this little design. So that's how we got where we are. I know there wasn't much neighborhood notice. That's kind of on me, but when I saw this opportunity, I just hustled to see if I could get the money, Brennan and Scott on the same page, and we did. And I turn it all over to these two magicians to share with you their plans and the magic that we hope to do with a small amount of money. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Let me turn it quickly over to Scott. Scott, do you have a few words that you want to say?
Yeah, well, first, thanks, Sophie. Thanks for all those kind words. You have been really supportive for all the facilities and parks in your district, and we are making a lot of good improvements. And so we are starting in, you guys, the city passed in 2014 an increase in the parks tax, and it allowed me to have enough money to deal with a lot of maintenance issues in the parks, and at that time not lay off 5 staff people. And so it is we are using that money to do a lot of different things. We're doing major renovations to parks, but we're also refreshing a lot of parks. And so each year we're trying to refresh 2 or 3 smaller parks. And by I mean refresh, either putting new play equipment in, putting garbage cans in, making things ADA accessible, sometimes just spending anywhere between $20,000 to $25,000 at a smaller park. And so this year, we've got 3 parks that we're focused on. We're focused on Haskell Mabel in kind of Southwest Berkeley, Remillard, if any of you know where that is, it's up in the hills, and then Solana Peralta. And so I informed Councilmember Hahn, and like she said, she went out and got another $80,000 for the park. And so we have somewhere about $105,000, $110,000 to play with. And we're really excited about that. We can do a fair amount in the park for that much. Well, we can't renovate the whole thing, but we can replace a lot of the amenities and upgrade some of the amenities, put in some new play equipment. And so that is why we're here, is to talk to you about, you know, what's possible, what you guys would like to see done, and then to, you know, go back and take a look at those wants and needs and figure out what we can do. And as Sophie mentioned, Brendan has volunteered to his landscape architect skills to come up with a plan for the park. We've met several times, and he has got a PowerPoint that he's going to show you and talk about some of the options.
Thank you so much. Before I turn it over to Brennan, I just want to let everyone know, if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat, and we'll try to get to a Q&A section after Brennan's presentation. Brennan, would you say what, 20 minutes on the presentation that you're thinking? You're muted.
Maybe less than that. We'll just see how fast I talk.
Okay, that sounds good. And a quick question for Scott. Can you talk just 60 seconds about what the perceived timeline is for any of this sort of round of improvements and updates?
Yeah, it all depend on what we end up doing is the timeline. If we're ordering new benches and some new play equipment, some of our timelines at some of our locations are because of the delay in materials has been, up to 3 or 4 months delay, longer than it's taking to get materials. So it just depends on what we settle on. If we settle on something that's got to be shipped from Europe or from the East Coast, then it's going to take a lot longer, as opposed from something that comes out of, somewhere in the Midwest or Los Angeles. So those timelines will change depending on how we pick. But the money's there. Councilmember Hahn has identified 80,000, and I've got another 25 or 30 in parks tax. We're going to designate that to this park, and so even if it takes a few months to get stuff in and get it in place, the money's not going anywhere.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, Brennan, do you want to go ahead?
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. You can hopefully all see my screen there. We had an agenda, and we've moved through some of those items. Everybody, I hope, knows where it is. If you don't, get out, walk out your door. You might run into it in short order. I think we all visit this park and actually all love it. It's probably been a little loved to death. But I think the fascinating thing is that there's so much potential here. And as many times as designers, we're struggling to get people to come to places, but people already come here. So it's really a little jewel. And I know that there's a lot of people that really do care for this park. And so I think using this as an opportunity to just put a little bit of a polish on it is a really great opportunity. These were alluded to earlier, and someone sent them to us. I can't remember, maybe it was Regina. They're fascinating, and I would love to close Peralta off. I think that Peralta is generally, as a urban design, we do a lot of streetscapes and intersections, and it's a terrible intersection. And giving it over to the park as a really robust plaything would be, really fantastic. We're not going to do that with $100,000, but I think it's a nice idea to think about, frankly, long term. Part of being a designer is and understanding the public realm is knowing who uses the public spaces and who has used. And we all know Solano Stroll, and hopefully we're getting back to a normal, and that 2022 will have a fun, robust Solano Stroll. And we tossed in these photos again of just the Chinese New Year celebration that happened just recently. And I was speaking with Alan at the Solano merchants and how they value this space as well as a kind of activator and the kind of the central square for Solano. And so it's a really useful spot. I think we all this is a plan image. We all kind of understand the areas, and we've kind of labeled them as kind of the sunken plaza, and there's the fenced playground area. And then there's the space that's used by the cafe area. Scott alluded to it. We have roughly $110,000. And in the realm of building public parks, that is not very much. But we're going to make it work for us in this situation in ways that I think can be really beneficial. There's this little tagline that I thought is we're looking at the public realm, and we got to think about what the realm of possibilities are and how we can really bring an amplified life to this new park. It already is being used, but I think that there are ways to make it used in so many more meaningful ways for people. And so there's kind of 4 elements that we are going to discuss, and we're going to throw some ideas around. One of them is seating. I think we all value the idea of occupying public space, and we value it in sitting places and watching people that is comfortable. One of the elements in the park is a playground. And so there hasn't been a play structure there in a long time. And so thinking about how kids might use it to play. I have a family of many young children, and they would be very interested in the return of a play element there. Another part that we're going to discuss is planting. The trees that are there are in mediocre shape, but there's virtually no ground cover, basically. And I think other than in the pots, but that's another scope that we're going to try to use some of that money is to do some redo the planting. And then in the upper right is maybe a little bit more wishful with the budget that we have, but an element that we might put on the plaza that creates kind of a there, something that is exciting, something that you might say, hey, meet me at the big chair or something. But and in today's parlance, it would be called the Instagram moment, right? So when it comes to seating, the seating that is there now is not the most comfortable and not the most pleasing. It's a giant chunk of concrete with some 2x4s. And so there's an idea about thinking about more permanent seating that is comfortable, is more dynamic in a visual sense. It's colorful, it's bright, it adds legibility to the park. So these are some examples of what that seating might be. I think we all really would value a spot to have lunch or have dinner sitting outside. We have such nice winters, yeah, and summers. We have 2 kind of ideas for how a playground and a play space might be thought of. And one of those options is embracing kind of the natural wonder, especially here in Thousand Oaks and North Berkeley. We are so connected to nature. And so using kind of natural elements to create a play space, whether it be rocks and sand and bark mulch and logs, to create something that kids kind of can climb around on and be kind of, imbue the kind of the qualities of nature. Another option that we have is the more prototypical kind of playground, which is metal and plastic structures that are a little more pre-programmed. I'm managing children here that want to comment. So this would also be something that we should in the discussion afterwards is talk about what we think that might be. We have an opportunity in this park to develop a kind of a water play idea. There is an existing water spigot there. Unfortunately, right now it's about this tall and it's an on and off and it goes right into the sand. But there's something that we might be able to do to kind of amplify that as a play element for kids, which I think would be very fun. It's working off of the kind of natural play element. Around the perimeter, mostly along the street, we are going to propose a new planting understory ground covers. We are going to kind of use the species that we think are most adaptable in this spot. They'll be drought tolerant. We'll use ones that we think would foster the kind of critters in the birds and bees that would support plants that would support those animals. And here's just a smidgen of those images, what we might be planting. And then what we did is we just kind of, and I'm going to also point out here, one of the other options that we have is this is a perspective. My office put together some perspectives. Is we have an opportunity to plant some more trees up on the upper plaza along Solano. This is of course being very cognizant of the view shed for cars that are approaching that intersection. So we want to be very cautious about safety, but we think we can accomplish this by adding some more trees. And so what you see here is kind of an aerial photograph, is where we've shown where we might add some furniture. This image shows kind of a log play thing in the lower, in the playground area, adding some picnic tables there, as well as some other benches. And so these are just a couple of images just showing like what that improvement might start to look like. These are obviously very preliminary, but they're just meant to kind of begin the discussion. So really kind of amplifying things with new planting, new furniture that is comfortable, but adds a legibility and are visually interesting as well. This is now looking down into the lower plaza. There's an idea that we have about these kind of like seating table things in the steps, where you might be able to sit and occupy that space and have a burrito. This also shows a location where we're thinking of adding those new trees that are on this kind of south side, which would shade the plaza, which I think would be really great. This also shows the picnic tables that we think would be really great at that same level. And then again, another view showing the kind of potential for new plantings. Keeping the plaza very open. I had a great, again, a conversation with Alan, and how I think that the ability to kind of program and use the plaza in a variety of ways. I think we all can have experienced that, whether it be a band playing during Solano Stroll or the Chinese New Year celebrations. But having kind of an open plaza, I think, is really great for people to kind of congregate and have performances. And this is one of the last images, but again, just kind of the playground structure showing the idea about water play and kind of a log climb that kids could kind of scramble over. And the last image. Budget, we're working with the budget on all of these elements. They do cost money. Seating, oddly enough, a bench costs anywhere from about $1,500 to $2,000. The water play elements are about $13,000. So there's some real dollars that we're allocating for some of these items. We know we have to stay in budget, but we want to be as kind of creative with how we spend the money as well. But most importantly, we're here because we want to hear from all of our neighbors, and we want to hear about how you use the park now and how do you want to use the park. And this is kind of the aspirational way of thinking about it. So yeah, I think I will end there. I don't know how long that was, but just would love to hear how people would like to use the park and aspects that could be made better.
Thank you so much, Brennan. I really appreciate it. For those of you who have questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat session. You can also raise your hand using the raise your hand feature, which I believe, depending on your Zoom setup, I think it's under reactions. I think I can't raise my hand because I'm a host.
Oh, come here.
But maybe we have a question already.
Okay. So how do you want to use the playground? No, come on. You gotta say it. You're gonna lose your shot. Do you like to run around on logs and play with natural things and grass and rocks? Okay, there goes one. Teddy, what kind of park do you want? What machines are we going to use to build the park?
What you meant? Just one impact hammer.
One impact hammer. Okay.
And a concrete boom.
And a concrete boom. Okay.
Thank you. That was great input. Okay, we've got a couple of hands raised. Let's start with Jason, and then Jamie, who also had a question in the chat, has his hand raised. Why don't you start, Jason?
Okay, thanks, David. And Brennan, I'm really excited to see these plans. I live directly across the street from the park, which was in Barbara Luce Ritchie's old house. And Regina, it was great to get a little bit more history. I've heard some of it about creating the park. My understanding is that originally that space was used as a key route turnaround. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's why there was that open area, and we've really enjoyed the park a lot. We bought our house in 2013. What was really very apparent when we first moved in was that the park was used a lot by nannies who brought kids there, mostly because there were a lot of toys in there. And when the city started taking the toys out, the nannies didn't bring the kids there anymore. And, as the years have gone by, there have been fewer and fewer kids playing. I love the idea of the natural logs. That was something that we had even discussed. I think it's the perfect sort of play structure for kids that age, and that's really what the park should be sort of designed for. The other thing I want to sort of advocate for, I think that should be the number one priority, the play structure, I think, and I love the designs, Brennan, that you've got there. I also want to advocate for Talavera's seating, because during the pandemic, that's been one of the most wonderful developments, is the outside seating of Talavera. When we look out our dining room window, we see, people just enjoying the park and having, eating at Talavera, and it's been a really sort of a real enrichment. So, I hope we want to make sure that I know that Sophie has worked with Talavera to try to make that situation more permanent, and I hope we can. But it sounds like that these designs are very flexible, which is great. And one thing I wanted to also mention, and maybe when you spoke with Alan, this was something that was discussed. The city of Albany has their complete streets plan, which is somewhat aspirational at this point, but I hope that, maybe they could get some infrastructure money, and eventually Solano Avenue will be redone. And I believe in that design, the bulb outs would be increased, and that parking spot, which runs along the front of the park, which is always a real problem because UPS trucks park there. People can't see as they're coming up Peralta. They can't see the traffic coming down Solano. And that parking spot in the complete streets designs was removed, which I think would make a huge difference. I don't think trees would be a problem there, but UPS trucks definitely are a problem in that parking spot. So, you know, I love the idea of adding trees closer to Solano. You know, that ruin our you know, view of 7-Eleven, but we're happy for that to happen. So anyway, I love the design so far, and thanks for listening.
Thank you, Jason. We're going to get to Jamie in a second, but I do want to point out that, you know, Sophie posted something in the chat that this is an opportunity to kind of raise, you know, like big vision things, right? Just because there's only, you know, what it might feel to some of us like a lot of money, but Brendan has pointed out is not a lot of money in sort of updating, but maybe there are ways for us to raise more money. So I think it's fine to think big in this meeting and to throw out ideas that might seem above and beyond. I'm going to turn it over to Jamie, who also put in the chat about lighting, and again, raising the question of like, is that out of the perspective of, you know, sort of the finances here, but let's not limit ourselves to the financing that's been discussed here in the meeting. Go ahead, Jamie.
Okay, hey, thanks very much. I pretty much second what Jason said. We also live right across the street from the park at 878 Peralta. And I think I'm encouraged by Brennan's initial evaluation and looking at what's realistic. And it would be great if lighting could be addressed, not just from the standpoint of using the park, at least in the early evening hours, but also from a security standpoint. You know, a lot of those toys that were over the years, and we've lived here since 1989, a lot of the toys that are in the, or were previously in the sand area were, you know, either destroyed by older kids that come in and hang out. And you know, the lighting, it's great Talavera's set it up. I also second what Jason said. It would be great to encourage the continuation where you're bringing the commercial and people eating out at night. And it's what you want. You want activity, you want people there at different hours as well. And it's great that they've added string lighting the way they've done it, but presently the only real night lighting is that single pole would be the northeast corner, and it's unpleasant. It's basically a sodium light, and it's not at all inviting. So I think that would be a good option as well. I like the trees, the idea of planting trees up on the southern part. I don't think that would all obstruct views of the traffic. What Jason said, the real obstruction are vehicles parked in the loading zone. That's what causes issues, because you're coming up a kind of a grade and you don't have a great view looking to the east when you come across Solano. But I think it's very thoughtful. It'd be great if you could add a water feature, but I realize budget is, it's fantastic that Sophie has come up with the additional funding. That's marvelous that we can at least start something, but we also have to be realistic as to what's affordable. And I think the ground cover, I like that idea as well. Unfortunately, what we've observed, the maintenance over time, and sometimes they're very committed, public works people that come in and work on the area or in the area. But, I think several years ago, there was a UC Berkeley program where students came in, spent a day or several days kind of cleaning up the park. And I think what's there now in terms of ground cover is really nondescript and doesn't get properly maintained. And some of the trees, Brennan, you noticed, are in not the greatest shape. So just clearing out some of those, opening up some view corridors so that the park isn't hidden at night, but planting the additional trees. So I'm encouraged by the thought that's gone into this already. And it'd be great if you could add lighting to it, but I'm not sure how realistic it is to the budget. Oh, and lastly, I would say it would be fantastic to close off Peralta and open up the park. that would be the ideal. Often we see cars coming down Peralta or going up Peralta as a through street, going at a pretty high rate of speed, unfortunately. And of course, you have to provide for emergency vehicle access to the neighborhood. So that's got to be worked into it. Anyway, I've gone on long enough, but it's a great start.
Thank you, Jamie. Amanda, you've been waiting very patiently.
Thank you. And thank you all for the work you've done so far. We live at 832 Peralta, it's my husband Gavin. So just a little bit further away than Jamie and Jason, but we use the park frequently. We usually are sitting in the fenced in area with our two young kids. We have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. I think we both looked at each other with excitement at the idea of logs and water. Our kids would love that. They would be all over it all the time. And they already, I mean, when we go there, we're usually eating food from Talavera, sitting on the picnic table, and our kids are like just digging in the sand, making giant holes and making a mess of themselves. So that's what they like to do. We're both architects. I work for associate at Siegel and Strain. Gavin's the principal at Lumberg Design, and so we know how much effort goes into this kind of thing. So Brennan, really appreciate that you're volunteering your time on this, and we're really excited, I think, about the design. You know, it's a great use of a very tight budget. Ground cover, you know, cleaning up the ground plane, taking out some of the trees and adding new ones to sort of shield from Solano in that park, I think is great. You know, we don't use the sunken area as much unless we're watching a performance because it just feels too exposed to Solano with our young kids. So yeah, I mean, overall, we're really excited. We really appreciate the effort that's gone into this. And we know that budget is a limitation, but want to echo entirely our support for closing Peralta at Solano. Fast cars, terrible line of sight. We've been here since 2013 as well, and you know, have basically stopped going up Solano up Peralta in that direction towards Solano. We loop around, usually down to Santa Fe to a safer intersection. Because it just feels really, really dangerous, particularly with the double parked UPS trucks. And so, yeah, we definitely support closing that off and expanding the park. If that doesn't happen now with this budget, which it won't, we would be great supporters of figuring out how to make that happen sometime in the future.
Thank you so much.
I just want to second, the wood play structures would be amazing. There's so many parks, so walking distance with the kind of plastic play structures, and having something like a really cool wood adventure play structure like that would be amazing. I really support that.
Thank you. Regina, you mentioned in the chat that you were hoping to comment about both the planters and also what is Albany and what is Berkeley here?
I seem to recall when we were involved with a bit of design and input that the sidewalk is Albany. So maybe
That's correct.
already. Well, is that correct?
Yes, but I don't know how far in. It may be that the portion where the trees are shown is Berkeley. It's not exactly that it's the sidewalk, it's that the line between Berkeley and Albany is essentially along the front face of the buildings.
And my understanding is if you get shot on the sidewalk and fall into the entrance to the building, you've died in Berkeley.
If that's your wish, yes.
If that's your wish, okay.
That is an interesting way to frame that one. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm so pleased and relieved about including the natural environment of that park. You know, I was so nervous if it ended up with some bright blue and red huge structure that would just not quite fit in. I love the idea of the logs or some kind of sculpture kids can play on and the water plays. So I really want to thank you very much for all that volunteer work put in, and also for the parks. And just one quick comment about the boulders. Those Barbara got donated, those big boulders with plants that are kind of up by the front on top of the steps. Originally, they were down in the lower part of the park. But once the park opened up, there was a car that drove down those steps. So they decided that the planters would have to be moved up to prevent cars. People weren't used to that being a park. Of course, I think that only happened once. So I just thought I'd throw that little tidbit in. So I'm very excited. I would love the street to be closed. The people who were opposed to closing that upper Peralta have now, one has moved to Calusa Avenue and another has left the state. So there may be some opportunity down the road. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. You know, Scott, maybe you can talk a little bit about, you know, it sounds like there's a lot of support here in the Zoom room, which is not necessarily an exact sample of the general public out there, but for doing something pretty large in scale in terms of traffic and all that kind of stuff, of closing off Peralta at that part and making it broader. Like what would have to happen for that to happen? Not necessarily in the confines of this update, but just in general, like what all happens? Maybe Sophie.
Yeah, the work in the street is going to be, especially closing off, it's going to be a transportation issue. And so it would probably have to, I don't know, maybe start with a referral from Councilmember Hahn to take a look at it, and the transportation would have to take a look at the possibilities and the effects of that. And
Yeah, Scott, I'll jump in. We had the experience of closing a block of 2nd Street to put our homeless services stair center there. And I could not have imagined how complicated it is to close a street. It is very hard to do. There's all kinds of state laws about streets. But there's also emergency access issues. And so the fire department also cares about, you know, the facility of getting in and out. Cul-de-sacs are really impossible for them if it isn't a real circle that they can turn around in. And the standards today for those kinds of things are different than what they were when a lot of Berkeley was laid out. So it certainly is something that could be studied. But I'm not sure we would want to combine that with this refresh. It's kind of a broader idea that, you know, I could certainly just write an email to Public Works and just ask them what it would take. But I will just say that my guess is that it takes a lot, and then you have to have the money to make it into a park. And it might be a big undertaking.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it very definitely is something that is separate, but it's interesting how something like sort of renewed interest in the park makes people think about this kind of thing. And I know that the thing that's interesting about this one intersection is that people who drive cars don't even like this. And I know that pedestrians, I walk there all the time. I drive my car there, and it's not fun to be in either situation at that intersection. It's problematic. So Brennan.
I would be a huge fan of obviously closing the street. I just want to put my 2 cents in, obviously, that I think lighting would be really great. And I think if we were to look for adding money into the budget for this little bit, I think lighting would be great. But I think lighting, the reason we can do kind of the water play thing is because there's already spigot there, and there is a light that's there already, and it's terrible, as someone already mentioned. But adding a light, I'm guessing, and Scott, I'd love to hear his number, but it's probably like a $20,000 number for just one light. We could be really creative with that, but I think it's an expensive, unfortunately, it's an expensive, when you're going to do public realm type lighting, it's an expensive ask.
Yeah, and I'll echo that that comment. Lighting is going to need to be engineered and then installed. So it does get expensive. You know, what we're hoping to do with this project is, and my park superintendent's on the line here somewhere, his name is Bruce Pratt, but what we're hoping to do with this project was to not have to engage a contractor to install whatever it is we're going to install. Because once we do that, then the budget is going to escalate. It's going to escalate really, it's going to be really expensive, because now if we have to go out to bid to install something, then it's going to, the price automatically just, you know, having a contractor in Berkeley becomes very expensive. We have a lot of requirements and that they're going to have to meet, and all that goes on top of their bid price.
Yeah, I think what Scott, maybe we didn't explain at the beginning, is that one of the parameters that we're trying to remain within here is work that our own city crews, Scott's staff, can do themselves. And that is a huge way to keep costs down. And that is basically, we are budgeting for only work done by city crews. We obviously would buy the play elements and buy the benches and tables and things like that, but they can be installed by our own staff. And that's why we're able to, you know, get a relatively large amount of refresh for the money. So that's the issue with Scott saying, if we have to bring in an outside contractor, that just, not only is it the lighting, but it's a whole new dimension to project delivery. You know, it's like the difference between doing your garden yourself or deciding you're going to have a concrete person and a landscape architect and this and that. It's just different magnitude and different costs. If I could just briefly, Brennan, were you going to comment on the lighting, or because I was
going to comment on something I forgot to when is that in regards to big projects though, right, is Berkeley is considering a new bond, and it has a lot to do with streets and resiliency. Yeah. And on a rounding error, from what we're going to be asking for this bond, I mean, I think that it's a very possible to have a bigger project for, you know, identified it, and this be one of them. It could,
yeah, it's a good point.
Throwing that out there.
There could be money later for other things, absolutely. I just wanted to I took a couple of notes listening to people, and I have like a question for Scott, and I wanted to be responsive to some of the things that were said. So lighting, we've talked about a little bit here. I wanted to say on the question of getting rid of the parking, if that's something that people are interested in seeing now and there are safety issues, we could certainly bring that up with our Albany council members. I'm not sure. Has anyone ever made a request or anything, or is that just something?
Let me suggest it would be great to improve the vision as you come up, Peralta. I think that will be very difficult because both Talavera, UPS store, many of us use that. There's various commercial operations where that it's a loading zone, would be, it would cause probably they would have issues. So it's an ideal vision.
Not good to stir the pot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that's true, Jamie, but you know, if you look at the plans that Albany drew up, that parking spot was going to be removed because they do see it as being unsafe, and it is unsafe. I mean, that intersection, we hear people honking almost every day at each other, trying to, you know, and, you know, there's a lot of confusion coming across, you know, from one side of Peralta to the other side. There's confusion with pedestrians, and because it's not a perfectly, you know, a perfect cross, there's a jog there that adds, you know, additional weirdness to it. So, I mean,
it's true that it might be good to get rid of it, and it's also true that it could be viewed as complicating factor for some of the businesses. It is an Albany question. I just wanted to put out there that people wanted to request that even be looked into, that there's no reason why you or I or whatever can't go and ask Albany about it, right?
Sure.
So I'm not advocating for or against it. I'm just saying an ask can be made, and it could be evaluated. And if people are interested in that, they can either reach out to Albany council members or they can reach out to me and I can talk to them. On the question of the border, I think we answered that. There was a comment about Talvera and whether we've been in contact with them. I'll just say that I have talked to them a couple of times. And apparently they are actually supplementing the maintenance that Scott's crew does. They're power washing and keeping the space clean, which I didn't know. And of course, expressed enormous gratitude. And before we embarked on this little project, they said they would be happy, just as a gift to the community, to continue, wiping tables off and things like that at the end of the day or every couple of days. So they seem like a really wonderful partner. And I think that once we know what we're going to put in, they may very well be willing to help. The city's crews are not going to be out every evening, right? So it's very nice to know that we have such a community-oriented business there who we might be able to rely on to continue to help. Scott, I wanted to ask, I think some people talked about or alluded to sort of maintenance. If we're going to put in really nice landscaping, are we going to be able to maintain it? And I wondered if, given the strong community involvement here, if sort of one of our Adopt a Spot programs might be appropriate. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a great idea, especially where we're putting in new gardens and we've put in over 10 pollinator gardens in the last year and a half in the city. We've been able to hand off a lot of the maintenance to community members and volunteers who are interested in keeping their parks beautiful and keeping up gardens. And we would look to do the same here in this area. We do have limited landscape staff, and they are quite busy during the day. And any help that we can get in maintenance keeps things looking nicer. But we're not able to get to all the parks all the time. And so if we could, coming out of this process, maybe working through TONA, we could find a group that want to volunteer in the park, and whether it's just once a month or once every couple months, go up and do, some weeding, some making sure the plants are in good shape, making sure the irrigation lines are working would be really helpful. Yes.
Great, thank you. And I mean, that's something that I'm not going to tell TONA what they should be doing, but it's the kind of thing that a neighborhood organization could organize and just have a call out every month or two. We need 2 people to come weed and or maybe there's a little group of people who really want to take it on, and it can be formalized with the city or it can be more informal. But I think if we're going to make the investment, we probably should have a little bit of neighborhood organizing around upkeep. The city really, they can fix something that's broken, and they do come out, periodically a couple times a year, but it's just not the kind of everyday maintenance that we may want for a park that's that heavily used. And then about raising money and what we might be able to spend more money on. Yes, there could be more money from the city in the future. There could also be some kind of little fundraising effort in the community if there was sort of one special feature that people wanted, and an artistic feature or something that could be a way to do that. And sometimes when you do a little bit of local fundraising, it actually gets people more invested in the park in a nice way. It kind of connects them to it. As to sort of what is super expensive, I think we touched a little bit on that. Anything where you have to bring in another contractor puts a lot of time and money in. But also, for example, the concrete, right? Like some of the boards in between the concrete are a little worn out, and the concrete job is a little dated. That, I think everyone knows it was 1976 when they were pouring that kind of concrete, right? it's a very much of a specific time, but all that hardscape work is very expensive. Anything electrical, if we didn't have water there already, water would be expensive. So to the extent that it's kind of furniture, movable elements, soft things like plants, play equipment, things like that, it's relatively easy and not too expensive. So those were all the things and I guess I'll say that I've heard a lot of support for the natural type play structures and for the water feature. So, just reflecting on what I heard. Scott and Brennan, what are next steps on this?
I think our next step is we've heard a lot of good information, and is for Brennan and myself to go back and talk about, given our budget, what can go in, and kind of come up with a conceptual design, final conceptual design that'll work, and then start taking a look at prices for elements and seeing what we can do. And maybe once we've figured out what we're going to do, come back to this group and kind of display what's going to happen over the next period of the next several months. Brennan, does that sound right to you?
Yes, that does.
Yeah, I did want to make a comment, Sophie, is that we've had, you know, the last year or so, we've had a lot of communities come forth and donate to their parks. It's been amazing. We, council just accepted a $16,000 donation for Strawberry Creek Park, of which we were buying picnic tables and benches. And we've got one coming for Cordonisis Park. And I think it's going to be close to a $20,000 donation where we're going to establish a new picnic area in Cordonisis. And we just had a $26,000 donation for Aquatic Park to put in a small dog park. And we've got a couple more in the pipeline. And so it's really been interesting how the Berkeley community has really, in this, you know, in the last 6 months to a year, these donations have all kind of materialized, and communities are interested in contributing to their park space. And I think it has something to do with COVID. A lot of people are out in the parks and using our park system, and hasn't been this well used for years. And it's, I think people can say, oh, wow, my dollars can go to help improving something like this. Let me try and go ahead and donate. So,
You know, along those lines, we talked about lighting, which I think would be a really great addition. Maybe there's an option with lighting that we can sell to the neighborhood. I mean, we certainly would give money towards that effort. And maybe along the lines of what Scott said, if people saw the excitement of what Brennan is developing as a design and what could be, we could actually go out and solicit that. I also wanted to mention two other things. I wanted to second the comments about wood structures for the play area. I think that would be great. It would be durable, less susceptible to vandalism. And from the standpoint of the vision of the future, not within the scope of this, I think the biggest issue to closing that street will be fire department emergency vehicle access. But Portland, Oregon has a great example of where they actually have gates that they close in the busy downtown street to open up a theater pedestrian area. There would be a number of different ways they could close. We could close the street, yet allow emergency vehicles to gain access for fire and ambulance. And so that should be part of what was suggested as a long-range infrastructure improvement.
Thank you. A quick question for Sophie and Scott. If folks did want to contribute, like how do people earmark a contribution for a specific park effort? And is there a way to do that in like a tax deductible way or anything like that?
yes. And
Tax deductible.
yep. So yeah, any donation over $1,000 needs to go get approval from council, and so it goes to council. Essentially what happens is, you know, you can identify it if you want to contribute to this park or to a certain element even. We've got it set up in the parks tax so the money gets put into the actual project or to the actual park that you want to identify. So if somebody wanted to say donate $5,000, then we would go to council, accept the money would go right into this project.
Great. Well, we have a printed newsletter that gets hand delivered to over 1,800 homes in Thousand Oaks, and we definitely can. One of the very sort of minimal things that we can do is put that in the next newsletter about how people can earmark money to go to this special little park. So that's good to know, and I'll get the full details from both of you before we go to press on that next one, which will be sometime in May or something. So
I would just recommend that if we could tie it to a specific improvement that would add to a change with the money that Sophie's raised, show what we're going to do or what the city's going to do anyway, and say, look, we can add this feature if we can raise this amount of money. It gives people a tangible identification of how they can, donate their money.
That sounds great, and I'm sure Brennan will be happy to think about what sort of a special touchstone light feature might be and where it might be. Scott, I think I wanted to just put one little caveat on the donations, which is that you can't force us to do things by donating money. I did have someone in another park who was kind of hounding me for a while. They wanted to make a very significant change to a large portion of one of our parks, and they wanted to give us the money for it, but it wasn't part of our program. And so we can't, we certainly can take donations for types of features or projects that are within the scope of what the city is allowing in that park, but we can't let somebody completely change a park or project just because they give money. It took me a year to get that very sweet and generous person to understand that we couldn't really take their gift and sort of make our public park into what they wanted it to be, which was very specific.
The one thing that I want to ask about, and this sort of relates maybe to a question that was in the chat having to do with art. Brennan, you alluded to this sort of their Instagram in the parlance of the youngins out there, a way to sort of make this park sort of immediately distinctive. Do you want to talk about that at all, or?
I'm going to interrupt that comment, Brennan. You're on mute, but so any public art in city property is got to go through the Civics Art Commission. So they would essentially, the money would go, we need to give money to them. They bid out, and then they decide essentially what gets put in the park or on the landscape. And so that we don't have a whole lot of control over that. But that's the process for public art in the city. So the money needs to go to the Civic Arts Commission. They need to accept the project and then put it in their plan, and then they will take that funding, put it out to bid, and hire the artist to do the work. So it's not as easy as it sounds.
Thank you for that.
A well-designed element that was part of the infrastructure of the park would not have to go through that. So Brendan, you want to?
I'm a huge fan of the arts. My wife is an artist, so I walk a tightrope when I say sort of things like this. But I don't think public art is the way to go. And I'm going to bring up, this is unfortunately a shameless plug. This is my own office. We did this, love it or hate it, down in Albany. This was considered interactive public art. It's it creates a there. It's an element that is visually interesting. It's engaging. I'm not suggesting anything remotely like this, but it's the idea that there's something that becomes captivating, that could be more captivating with the space. Sorry, I'm just going to do this, but another idea. Well, this is very exuberant play structure, right? This is a 3-story play structure. Again, not something we would ever do, but it's the idea about something that's big, visually interesting. It could be, shamelessly, I know, but it could be something just quite as simple as, sorry, trying to find this project here, that it's just a simple shade structure, or that we could use. This would be an example of, or a bench. It could be a very interesting bench that could be kind of, you know, made of wood, but visually interesting, something original. Here's a shade structure that's not as fun and exuberant. It's a corporate campus, but something that creates kind of a moment that you might not see somewhere else. Basically, that's what I think the intent would be for that kind of bigger item.
Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. And it is interesting, like, you know, what is art versus what is a structure, and sometimes there can be a little bit of sort of overlap in our minds around that. We are coming up on 8:31, so we sort of allotted an hour from the 7:30 time to talk about this. I'm sure this is going to be an ongoing conversation. I love that this little pocket park has this wonderful history that Regina shared with us tonight, and that is now getting a fresh face and maybe even some more, and also is getting us to think about some other bigger issues around, like traffic flow and all that kind of stuff. So I appreciate this conversation. Thank you so much. Also to Sophie Hahn and Scott Ferris for their efforts to make this happen, and for all of you who showed up, and Brennan, of course, who's putting in so much of his time. All of you, thank you so much. Please,
could Scott just touch on the process and the timing and what's next and how it plays out?
Sure. So we'll go back and we'll figure out what we could afford, and given based on your feedback, and price it out, figure out how we're going to do it, and then probably come back to you and say, okay, this is where we are, this is what we're going to install, and then we'll work on getting toward, work on completing the project, ordering the benches, the water feature, whatever it is we order, and get that stuff and install it. So I would look, you probably going to hear back from us. I don't know, David, how often do you guys meet?
You know, the great thing about Zoom is we can meet much more sort of quickly and at a drop of a hat kind of thing. So certainly we can put together something pretty quickly. We tend to meet 3 times a year, but we have the capacity to do that more frequently when it's on its own Zoom feature.
Okay. So maybe a couple months then?
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe sooner. We're going to have to get everything and figure out how to order it, whether or not we can install it, and then put together a thought process on how we're going to get there. So it may take us a month, may take us 2 months, but we'll call you, and hopefully we can set something up when we're ready.
Can I suggest something a little radical, or at least ask folks? Assuming what is finally decided is, 85% what you've already seen, do you really need to see it again? Is it important to you? And please say yes if it is. Like, if you just really want to see it again and have another meeting where it's presented again, if it's very similar to what you've already seen, then we'll do it. But if not, I don't know. If it slows the project down, maybe it's better to just go and to only review it if it's significantly different from what was presented. Just asking.
Well, I would say, first of all, that, obviously what TONA is interested in doing is keeping the community informed and engaged. And certainly we don't want to do anything that slow things down. That's not our intent. But at the same time, what was presented tonight was a myriad of options that Brennan threw out there. So I would say definitely we as a community would love to see how things are developing, not to slow things down, not to say that we're trying to build a consensus where everyone agrees on every aspect of the update on this park. I think that's not feasible or reasonable, but we definitely as an organization can facilitate coming together and seeing the great work of what's happening with the money that you guys have put forth with this. So yeah, absolutely, we'll definitely put something together.
And I would add, I'm not a big fan of design by committee. That sometimes results in disaster. I think Brennan has taken a really great first step, but I would say this: if we wanted to promote an additional feature, if we wanted to raise money, or just be able to talk about what's happening, it would be great for us to see what you've come up with.
All right, no problem.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much. This is being recorded. I know that there are some folks who couldn't make it tonight. There are a couple other meetings. I know that Office of Emergency Services was putting something on tonight as well. So we will post this and it'll be linked to the TONA website over the next couple of days. Thank you all so much for coming, and thanks for everyone who presented stuff here tonight and who spoke up about their neighborhood park. Thank you all for coming.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for
So
putting it
much.
together.
No problem.
I'm gonna save the chat as well. How's it down south, Elizabeth?